Well, it's all on the line on Friday night in Las Vegas, Oregon, Washington, the last Pac-12 championship. Everything you need to know right here, right now. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a special crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Huskies. I'm Spencer McLaughlin. Locked On Ducks, the Locked On Huskies co-hosts, are here with me as well. Roman Tomashoff and Lars Hanson. Roman's in the top right. Lars is on the bottom. I promise that was a random selection there. But everything is basically on the line right here for the Ducks and the Huskies in a rematch of what was one of the best games of the year in college football on October 14th. Roman, I'll start with you. I don't think the stakes can be much higher based on the committee's rankings. It seems like it's a win and in situation for both of these teams. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you look at Washington undefeated, just it feels like one win away from a potential Rose Bowl where I don't think there's any way they'd end up falling to 4 with a win here. So it's definitely winning in for Washington. And then it definitely seems it's the same way for Oregon, because with all the love they've been getting for the committee, get a win, you probably move up into the 4 spot. And then depending what happens with, Florida State and some other matchups this weekend, it does really feel like a win and in for both teams, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think for Washington, it's a 100% certainty. And I think for Oregon, it's an 80% certainty is what I'd say. I think there is a scenario in which you could have absolute chaos, but that would come back to, how the committee values all this sort of stuff. But Lars, as we've gotten to this point in the season, Washington 12-0, Oregon 11-1, it has felt like these teams were destined to meet here after the game on October 14th, where everyone kind of looked at it and went, yeah, those are the two best teams in the Pac-12. And it turns out, yeah, those are the two best teams in the Pac-12. What do you feel is different right now compared to the middle of October?
I feel like there's a little bit more momentum on Oregon's side, even though Washington comes in with a better record. Oregon's played better over the last 5 or 6 games since that meeting in mid-October, and I don't think that's a close comparison at all. I mean, at Washington, you're squeaking by Arizona State, you're squeaking by Oregon State, whereas you look at Oregon, they've blown out all these teams. So Oregon's going to be coming in with a much more confidence, and thus that's why they're not in the half-point favorites, right? I mean, Washington won this game. They beat the 12-point spread last year, but Oregon is just coming in with all the momentum. And you're looking at it thinking, okay, what can Washington do to hang around and survive, more so than how does Washington dominate Oregon? I don't think anybody's saying Washington's going to dominate Oregon, but there's also a case to be made where Oregon might not dominate Washington, and we get the exact same result that we had in October, where it's, hey, two teams trading blows, couple stops here and there, and it comes down to last couple of possessions. I just see this game, these two teams, the last 2 years, that's what it's been like. Even at points in the game where, wow, Washington might have had the edge last year at second, third quarter. This year it was kind of Oregon was the other way around, where they get the stop in Washington on 4th and 1. And I think it's going to still be a fourth quarter game. I don't think Oregon's going to cover the 9-point spread, but I do think it's intriguing, and especially coming in with that momentum, they certainly have every right to be favored by that much.
Yeah, I want to talk about that number because it is often a subject of conversation in the online sort of sphere. And I think 9.5 points is a big number. I think that's reflective of the public's confidence in Oregon. Now, Vegas opened the line at 7.5. It moved out to 9.5. That tends to be public money. Early money tends to be public money. Late money tends to be sharp money. So I'd be curious to see. I just can't imagine that line is able to get over 10 because it's already moved a couple points in Oregon's favor. And, Roman, when you look at the last couple matchups, they have been really, really tight. Oregon has played a lot better. I almost feel like that's a benefit for the Huskies because in any normal world, if we didn't have point spreads, if we didn't pay attention to anything like that, all the pressure would be on Washington, right? Because they're trying to go for, they've got the perfect regular season. They're trying to make it 13-0 and keep their winning streak going and everything like that. I almost feel like that number serves as a motivation for the Huskies of, hey, people are doubting us, we're underdogs, and coaches will take that any way they can and try to run with it.
Oh, absolutely. Lars and I have talked to coaches, players this week, and that really is what what the messaging is we don't mind being the underdog. Like, if you want to keep doubting us, fine. That's okay. They were underdogs a couple weeks ago when they went down to Oregon State. Like, it's not even something that this undefeated team is, that this is the first time they're seeing it this season. And so it's really interesting just to kind of see how far it is swung in one direction. As you guys both said, it really doesn't feel like this is going to be a 2-possession game either way at this point in time, especially with how we've seen these two teams play each other over the last couple of seasons. And Washington, certainly they want to use this as, as a talking point, as momentum, as all the levers they can get. I know coaches will always say, yeah, we don't really look at that sort of stuff, but the line has swung so far in Oregon's direction that you can't not talk about it at a certain point behind closed doors.
Yeah. I mean, if I were a head coach, I'd use anything and everything. I think back to Oregon's game against Colorado and the pregame speech that Dan Lanning gave his team. Everybody on the outside knew that Oregon was a much better team than Colorado, but on the inside, Dan Lanning is using whatever perceived chip or slight he can come up with to motivate his team, and it worked in that particular instance very, very well. Like, that is the job of coaches. So I'm with you, Roman, when people say, oh no, we don't listen to the noise, we block it out. Like, you might not hear everything, but you hear some of it. Like, everybody's got some downtime. People have social media, like that sort of thing has definitely happened. But this is a big line for a matchup that has been decided by 6 points combined in the last two meetings. It's come down to a field goal. And of course, Washington's come out on top in both of those games. Lars, if you had to point to a couple of reasons as to why you feel, the betting markets and a lot of public as well are so confident in Oregon here, from the Washington perspective, what is it? What's kind of been the biggest drawback for the Huskies in the last couple months?
I think it's consistency and execution. Just two simple things, right? Because Washington, and you combine them together, they haven't been able to consistently execute. When the defense has been clicking, the offense has regressed. When the offense has started to step up, the defense has given up touchdowns. There's never been both sides of the ball playing their best at the exact same time in the exact same game. They've gotten close at times, right? USC, you could argue was the case, maybe Stanford, but neither of those games you can point to, especially when you look at Oregon, when they're dominating all those games and saying, yeah, Washington is absolutely, this is actually a good team. It's like, well, no, they're kind of hanging on and surviving. And then, Michael Penix, the health on a number of levels with him, Roman and I both kind of agree he's more sick than hurt. I think that it's more of like a immune system issue, not a rib issue. Again, everybody's got bumps and bruises at this point in the season, so I'm not saying he's at 100% body-wise, but I think if Penix can basically just rest and recoup this week and get enough energy back, that solves one of their problems. But the other problem is Washington, and this gets back to an injury, hasn't been able to run the ball. So that basically you're relying on one part of your offense and the defense trying to stop the run. It's like it's a half and half of both. That's why there's not as much confidence on Washington's side from a public perception standpoint, right? Where if you look at Washington versus Oregon's run game carries the load and it's not even close. And that's not a slight to Dylan Johnson, but you have Bucky Irving and Jordan James who can get 120 at minimum, whereas Dylan Johnson hasn't been able to consistently get 100 yards. Now, on top of that, Will Nixon and Tyba Rogers have been the two behind him getting 25, 30 yards combined max if you're lucky. So I think the fact that has been a struggle for Washington in the run game. Jalen Polk has been on a different planet the last 2 weeks against Washington State and Oregon State. There's a number of different things. Jalen McMillan coming back missing. Washington hasn't had their full complement of receivers. So it's kind of been a survive and advance mindset. Now this week you have everybody healthy for them, basically, that you're going to have healthy at their healthiest. So this is kind of the opportunity for Washington to say, hey, yeah, we've been doubted, but now we have all of our pieces here. Now we just have to show that we can put it together in one singular game.
Real quick, is sickness what Michael Penix has said about that? Because I know he's been asked about it, but I haven't seen like a really clear, definitive answer.
He refused to answer after the game. Yeah, like he flat out was basically like Kyle Bonnegar asked him the question what the deal was after the game. He's like, no, it's all me. Next question. I appreciate it. Thanks, though. Like, literally, that was his verbatim response. Like, no, I'm good. Thanks. See you.
Well, I can assure you Oregon fans are accustomed to not getting a whole heck of a lot on the injury front, which will affect some of the matchups in this game that we've got to get to. One team is going to have a championship after Friday night. You can have a championship performance over at eBay Motors because passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Alrighty, let's get into the matchups here, because there are a lot of similar ones, but there are also, I think, a couple of notable differences. One in particular, compared to the October 14th game. Now, he did go out in that game with an injury, but it doesn't appear, it hasn't been confirmed, again, what I'm talking about here, that Jahlil Florence is going to play, Oregon's number 2 cornerback. Kyrie Jackson is totally fine health-wise going into this one. That's their top defensive back. But it looks like Jahlil Florence isn't going to play. It'll be Dante Manning, who played well last week against Oregon State, which I think was great for the Oregon side of things. I also think the Washington receivers are much better than the ones at Oregon State. They're different body types, but seeing Manning play well certainly has to have him in a confident headspace going into this game. But Roman, Washington's offense, as Lars alluded to, is also feeling pretty good because they've been able to throw the ball against this Oregon defense the last couple of years. There are a lot of the same players in the secondary, whether you're talking about Dante Manning or Triquez Bridges. But not having Jahlil Florence there, I think, is a plus for Washington in that department, as long as they're able to protect Michael Penix.
Yeah, I do. One thing that I do remember from the first matchup between these two teams is that Washington scored a touchdown because Michael Penix threw 4 passing touchdowns. He threw 1 on each of Oregon's top 4 cornerbacks on the depth chart. There was 1 on Kyrie, there was 1 on Bridges, there was 1 on Manning, and there was 1 on Florence, if you go back and watch the film on that one. And so I'm definitely curious to see how that's going to impact this game. But the two matchups, and when I look at just kind of, especially Washington health-wise, there are 2 big names that really didn't play. You talk about Jalen McMillan, who played a little bit in that first game, Spencer, against Oregon, had to leave in the first quarter. So getting him fully healthy and assuming is going to play a full game here is going to be huge for Washington's passing attack. But he's not the only guy on that side of the ball who didn't play in this first matchup. Right guard Julius Buelow didn't play in that game either. And when Brandon Dorlus was getting pressure, especially early on in that game, he was getting that over just the interior on the right side of the offensive line. So that's another one where Julius Buelow is a really good pass protector. He's 6'9" guard, so he's just got really good reach and is really good at countering some of the things that Brandon Dorlus likes to do. So I think that's really one place that
he's got to be able to bring the quickness, though. That's Dorlus's most lethal trait, his ability to be quick on the interior. And I mean, I obviously the guy's big enough at 6'9", but I think that's kind of the test for him on the inside, is can he match Dorlus's quickness? Because Dorlus, remember, is a guy who can line up inside or outside.
No, you're absolutely right. And we all know how good Washington's tackles have been this season. Troy Gaetano and Roger Rosengarten have just been absolutely spectacular. And then the one guy who Lars and I have highlighted on Locked On Huskies all season long that has just been absolutely spectacular this year, especially if he needs to help to the inside. If Brandon Dorlus tries to go inside, is center Parker Brailsford. He's a redshirt freshman who has just played, and I don't want to say out of this world because, I mean, he's been spectacular, but as Lars and I have both talked to multiple players and coaches, Lars talked to some former players too, just said, this guy's unbelievable. We love him so much. And this is just kind of what he does. And Parker Brailsford should be a first team freshman All-American come by the end of December. So he's somebody who also will just be a big help if Brandon Dorlus just does try to go to the inside there.
Yeah. And speaking of centers, Oregon's is not half bad himself. Jackson Powers Johnson should, in my view, be an All-American. Maybe I'm biased on that front. Who knows? But he's been quite good this year. But another matchup that I'm fascinated to watch in this game, Lars, is the running game for Oregon. So each of the last 2 years, I know the Ducks have lost, but Bucky Irving has looked like a man possessed, particularly against this Washington team. He has run all over the field, and Jordan James was really good in that first matchup as well. the Ducks have been able to run the ball. Curiously enough, the Oregon rushing attack does not come in red hot right now. They were held to just 4 yards a carry, which I think is their second lowest total of the season on a yards per carry average last week against Oregon State. And I think the Beavs' run defense has been consistently better than Washington's so far this year. But the Ducks actually haven't run for over 200 yards as a team since the Washington State game the week after the Ducks and the Huskies matched up. So coming into this game, I think Bucky Irving can be poised for a really, really big outing, or Jordan James. They've kind of been a hot hand department over the last couple of weeks in terms of who's getting the bulk of the carries. But Washington has struggled to tackle Oregon running backs. How do you feel about the defense in that regard going into this game?
Well, I feel a lot better if Carson Bruner is the starting linebacker next to Adefano Lefosio, because in that first game, I mentioned it to Roman on our show earlier on what's today, Wednesday, where
I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody cares.
But the point is that Bucky Irving was stopped behind the line for I want to say like a 2-yard loss, and then out of nowhere scooted for 8 yards. Washington's tackling has improved enough, but it's because they've changed out certain players. Carson Bruner is a sophomore linebacker, a junior linebacker that's kind of emerged throughout the course of the season in place of Alfonso Tuputala. The combination of Carson and his ability to actually read, and not only just read, but read and cut. Like, go watch the Oregon State game. He made a number of cuts to bring Damian Martinez down for at least no gain or a very, very short gain. That's something they did not have in that first matchup against Oregon. The other part of that is Tuli Tuligasinoa, the interior defensive tackle, defensive lineman, whatever you want to call him. He's going to play more of a role this weekend after getting, I think, 5 snaps against Washington State, more of a scheme thing, as Roman mentioned on our show. But those two alone shouldn't make a lot more difference in that run game to really slow Oregon down. Because I think if we're being fair here, Oregon's not going to not run the ball. It's just a matter of how much can you slow them down. Are you holding them to 120, 110? Because if you start to get over 130, 140, that's a problem for Washington's defense, especially when you throw in the fact of how well Bo and those guys can check it down and throw and kind of just move the ball. The thing with Washington, when it comes to stopping the run game, if you can force Oregon into more of a passing situation, I think as average as Washington's secondary is, that's a better matchup than Oregon running the ball against them, because anybody can run over Washington if you put enough bodies.
Do you feel that way, though, with the way that Bo Nix has been playing over the last 4 weeks? He's gone for over 400 yards twice, and he's accounted for 20 touchdowns and 1 pick.
No, that's to your point. I think if the one that I'm more worried about would be the run game, because if Oregon can, the reason why I say that is because if Oregon can run the ball effectively, it doesn't matter what Bo can do, because that's just a cherry on top, right? Bo can then throw for 300 or 400 and then it's a route, right? Washington has to be able to stop the run in order to make this game a little bit longer, make the drives a little bit longer. Even if you're still giving up points on those drives, you can't allow Bo to go quick, run 5, run 8, run 12, because then at that point, Washington's chasing the game, and I don't know if they have the firepower along with the defense that would be giving up those points to hang with Oregon in the championship game.
I think the biggest thing that defines this game, Roman, is Oregon's ability to get pressure on Penix. I think in the last several weeks, as he's been dealing with sickness, injury, whatever you want to call it, or whatever it is, I mean, nobody knows. So whatever it has been, he has not been the same guy. And one of the things that, came up in the Arizona State game that I think you've heard pundits and broadcasters talk about quite a bit is the interior pressure has disrupted Michael Penix in the pocket, as it does for any offense, frankly. It's the most disruptive thing you can do defensively is get interior pressure, because the quarterback doesn't really have an opportunity to directly run out one way or the other. And Penix is a guy who wants to kill you from the pocket. Oregon's defensive line last week against Oregon State, who was a little banged up with their front five, they played one of their best games ever, and I thought the interior guys did a really, really good job. If Brandon Dorlus and Popo Amavai, who you should not sleep on, he's a 19th year college football player, so he's pretty big and strong. If those guys and Jordan Birch and the way that they blitz Jeffrey Bossa from the linebacker position, if those guys get pressure consistently, then I think Oregon covers that 9.5. If they don't, then I think you have a game that plays out a lot like the last 2 matchups have.
So, Spencer, you're absolutely right. And that's where when I was talking about Julius Buelow earlier, it was kind of with that in mind. And we saw, because this is something that we saw a lot in the first matchup too, where Oregon's defense did a really good job of throwing some unique stunts and pressures at Michael Penix and this offensive line. And for the most part, they did a really good job of picking it up. And that's something where I'm very curious to kind of see how that's going to play out in round 2, where keep in mind over Oregon's last 2 games against Washington, they've recorded 1 sack. And that's something where I want to keep that in mind, just kind of as we look at this matchup. But
so just real quick on that, it was 1 sack in the. I think last year there was absolutely no pressure on the quarterback. I'm with you there. I think in this year's game there was 1 sack, but that was not reflective of the amount of pressure Oregon was able to generate. I think it was significantly better, not as great as I'd like it to be, but I think there was a lot more pressure than 1 sack would indicate.
No, you're definitely right there. And that's something where Michael Penix would do a good job of getting the ball out, doing different things. But I think that the interior has solidified since that first time that these teams played, where you talk about the Arizona State matchup. That was the last game that Julius Buelow missed. And then over the last couple of games, we've seen, because Washington held Utah and Oregon State, they were able to just kind of negate those pass rushes really well. And Oregon has done a really, really great job getting after the passer this year. But I think that Washington's offensive line has done an equally good job just kind of doing its best to negate pressure at times. And there are times where there have been overload blitzes, there have been different things that have been able to cause the Huskies trouble. But with this front 5, which is as healthy as it can possibly be, Lars and I have talked about the injuries were guys that went out early in the season that haven't been able to return. It's just kind of ad nauseum at this point that, this is as healthy as it's going to be. And I think that they're so much better at, pass blocking than they are at run blocking, that it's going to be a big test, but I think that they're up for the challenge, in my opinion.
Yeah, there are a lot of fun aspects to this game, and you can go look at some of them over on Prize Picks, which is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you'll watch the winnings roll in. If you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite community players like rapper Meek Mill and Andrew Schultz, you can find community plays under the promos tab of the app. Plus, Prize Picks offers a reboot policy. So your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half, which we hope does not happen here in this matchup on Friday, of course, and he doesn't return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go check them out at prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, so one fun thing that I've thought about in this game is that eventually it's actually going to happen, because I don't know about you guys. I have been actively trying to distract myself every single waiting moment of the week in the lead up to this game. I know some other Oregon fans feel the same way. I'm curious, because we talked about this a little with the point spread earlier in the show. Does Washington feel like the pressure? I'm just talking about the fan base here. Do the fans feel like the pressure's on the Huskies, or is the pressure on the Ducks? I think the pressure is kind of evenly balanced because of the way the season has played out. What do you guys think?
I think it's definitely just kind of even, because Washington fans are absolutely in the same boat. Spencer, I'm very curious how you're kind of alleviating some of the stress, because, look at like with your background. Can you cry into some of these pillows behind you?
I'm getting lost in my work. Luckily, I've had a couple of play-by-play broadcasts to do for Southern Utah this week. So that has really, really helped, because I've been, knee deep in prep for those games. And then when I go call them, like, I'm dialed in for about 2.5 hours. So, of the 24 hours in a day, I'm sleeping for 8 to 9 of them, 2.5 hours with calling the game. But once you add it up, there's still like another 8 to 10 hours to just think about this game, all the time.
That's all I do all day, every single day. I was playing basketball this morning. I was just, man, what's Oregon's secondary really going to look like in this game? No,
I'm doing the same thing. I'll just be like, I could be taking a shower, I could be doing work, and I'll just randomly think, how's Dante Manning going to hold up against Jalen Polk? it'll just pop into my head. Or I'll go, man, is Oregon really going to cover 9.5 points against a team that's beaten them twice in a row? Like, how are they going to handle the psychological factor of trying to get over the hump against the Huskies here? Lars, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? Because I think that I don't know that anyone on Oregon's side would admit it. I think it's absolutely in play, though. Like, there has to be something to playing a team that has ripped your heart out twice in a row.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting balance because Oregon is the one-loss team, has to win the game no matter what to get in, right? Or at least to have a position to get in. And I certainly think Oregon with a win is in. The interesting thing for Washington, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because the CFP has maintained the Pac-12 is the best one-loss team in the country, and it's been Oregon. But even after Ohio State lost to Michigan, they fell behind Oregon, right? Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm not. Right?
No, you are correct. You are correct. They fell to 6 and Oregon is 5.
So now again, Washington's going to need some extra help with this. But if Washington loses, let's say 36-33 to Oregon, it's a close game and everything just happens to be on the last play, and Florida State loses, and you kind of get a few other results going your other way, does Washington get that 4th spot?
So they should. Okay, so
as a one loss, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating topic. So Washington is guaranteed a slot in the top 4 if they're in. Oregon is most likely, I'd say, going to get a spot in the top 4 if they win, regardless of what happens elsewhere. There is a scenario, and it's not out of the realm of possibility, in which Oregon wins and they get left out. And the scenario involves Bama winning. If Bama wins, everything can go up in the air. Because what you would have at that point is a 12-1 SEC champion Alabama team that went unbeaten in conference play and beat the number 1 team and 2-time reigning champs in Georgia. So I think that would be a tough team to leave out of it. Now, Texas is going to dog walk Oklahoma State because Oklahoma State is not actually a good football team. They're just pretending to be one. Texas is a good team. So they're going to run them out of the building. And at that point in time, you will not be able to leave out Texas. Michigan's going to beat Iowa because Iowa's not going to score a point. Final score of that game, 27-0. Book it right now. Michigan 27. Iowa's defense is legit. Michigan's offense is just okay. 27-0. Michigan is going to win the Big Ten championship. So they'd be in. Then you would be in a situation in which Alabama has to get in at 12-1. And Texas beat them on their home field by 10 points. You're not leaving them out, so they have to get in. So now your 3 spots all of a sudden are Michigan, Texas, Alabama, and then a Pac-12 champion would try to get in. But guess what? If Florida State beats Louisville, it's kind of hard to keep them out, even though they too will get absolutely boat raced in the 14 playoffs. So, I'm definitely, thinking about that. If Georgia beats Bama, I think Oregon's in no matter what. I don't think there's a scenario in which they can get left out because the committee has consistently said, Oregon, we're more impressed with them than Texas. And people can debate that all they want, but that's the way the committee feels. And beating Oklahoma State cannot possibly be better than beating Washington, hypothetically, to the point where Texas then leapfrogs Oregon and they could be in a resume battle with, whoever would be below them there. But on the Washington front, if chaos does ensue, let's say Oregon wins and you've got a pair of 12-1 teams, there is precedent for a 12-0 team that had a lot of close games that they won, losing a conference championship game, getting into the playoff. Can we all think of who that was?
Bama.
TCU last year.
TCU.
That's right, TCU last year just did it. So there is precedent for that. If it comes down to Washington or Ohio State, I would put Washington in because they played for a conference championship. Ohio State did not. And at that point in time, you'd have a 12-1 team against an 11-1 team. And Washington still has a good resume, by the way, because the Pac-12, after the non-conference slate, we all established was the deepest conference in the country. Everyone started beating up on each other. And so we've decided now that we're going to revert back to, no, the Pac-12 actually wasn't any good. Colorado and USC weren't as good as everybody thought. Utah is exactly as good as we thought. They're an 8-4 team, but they're not ranked because they're in the Pac and whatnot. So if it comes down to Washington and Ohio State, which is perfectly possible, right? If Georgia wins, if Michigan wins, if Oregon wins, those are your top 3. Texas would probably have to lose. I think that is what would have to happen for Washington to get into the playoff. I think Texas would probably have to lose, but Your old pal Steve Sarkisian has blown games before, so you never know. You never know. Maybe Mike Gundy's has got something cooking, but I don't think the committee will put in a 12-1 Washington over a 12-1 Texas. And I think that if Texas loses and Bama loses, then Washington should get in if they lose the game, which I obviously think is possible. I don't know that I'm like as confident. I'm just nervous about the game. Like I see a lot of Oregon fans all over the place. Oh my gosh, we're gonna boat race Washington. We're gonna do this. I'm like,
that's our whole YouTube comment section, man.
Yeah, that's
like
basically
our whole comment section.
Yeah, that's how it is. So I'm gonna save my prediction for tomorrow on the show, though. I do think Oregon is going to win the football game. But if you guys would like to do predictions to end today's show, you're free to do so, or you may save them. Go for it. Yeah, Roman. See, Roman's not a predictions guy.
No, absolutely not. This is not my thing. Even though
you predicted
I will
Washington win last time and it worked out fine.
I called everything with that one because I said Washington by 3.
I also had Washington by 3.
Hey, respect. See, that's
yeah.
We
for what it's worth. For what it's worth, you know what? More people who will listen for the first time tomorrow. I've got Oregon winning 38-27. That is my prediction.
Okay.
I do not think this is a game though in which Oregon is going to, have a 21-3 lead in Washington. I think it is back and forth, and eventually I think Oregon's defense is able to make a play to kind of give them a win. And by the way, that field goal that I'm predicting Camden Lewis to make is inside of 25 yards. It's a short one.
I'll give you this, that it's not going to be a multiple possession game. I don't think that.
I respect that position.
These two coaches have matched up with each other the first 2 times. The way that they have just shown to go back and forth just on the chessboard with everything it is that we've seen from them so far, with the way these two teams are playing, this is going to be a true heavyweight fight. And I saw somebody on Twitter just say, yeah, this is going to be cinema. That's what it is. And at Spencer, I know you're going to be there. Lars and I will not be. I'm personally okay with not being there because it's just going to be just like everything inside that stadium is just going to be stress. And it's
if that stress isn't going to come through into your living room. I mean, let's be honest here. Lars, jump in.
I was going to say, so 2 parts. One, I matched your 38, but I have it 38-34 Washington. And my caveat is that final stand comes on a 4th down stop for Washington's defense to win the game.
Oregon fans are going to love that prediction right there.
Well, the part of that is Washington has shown they can execute on 4th down, and Oregon hasn't against Washington.
That is true. That is absolutely true. So Lars thinks a win. Roman is going to curl up in the fetal position, and I'm going to do that in the press box on Friday night in Las Vegas. Roman Tomashoff and Lars Hanson, co-hosts of Locked On Huskies. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And for my Oregon brethren, as always, go Ducks.